Trae Young is back, and maybe that's why they've been giving up 80-point halves. I can't. All right, everyone, welcome on to a 15 and 60 Sunday night Eastern Conference. No more mailbag. This time, you just get to hear our ideas of what to talk about. So perish the thought. Let's get rolling here, and we will do it with the New York Knicks versus the Miami Heat. Danny, you watched their game today. I saw a little bit of it, so we will start there. The Heat reeling, the Knicks coming off the high of a last-second win against the Pacers, and of course the NBA Cup. After that, I guess I should do their fundamentals since you're going to do most of the talking. Knicks are 20-8, 4-1 in their last 5, not including the NBA Cup. Fourth in net rating, a very robust plus 8.3. They are second on offense with a 123.4. That is a very good number. And average on defense, 15th with a 115.1. They project for the number 1 seed in the East with 56 wins. They will be making the playoffs. So they had a nice win against the Miami Heat today.
They did, and I thought this was a really fun game. And now games are a lot more fun when both teams make about half their three-pointers. 20 of 38 for the Knicks, 17 of 35 for the Miami Heat. So that definitely adds to it. And I thought that since you started with the Knicks fundamentals, I'll talk about a couple of the really fascinating wrinkles of this game. So I thought that there were 2 pivotal stretches that helped seal this victory, both of which I think said something important. So in the late second, the Knicks are down. They're down double digits. The Heat led the entirety of the first half. I'll talk about why. And then they go on a 13-0 run. Starts out with Mikal Bridges, who had a huge stretch, and then Jalen Brunson, who was absolutely masterful in this one, take them in. And so that stretch was really Brunson and Bridges. Brunson, that was a part of his 27-point first half on his way to a 47-point game coming off the NBA Cup championship earlier this week. And Mikal Bridges had 24. So that stretch, it was more of the traditional, their offense, the ball was pinging, all that stuff. That wasn't, if there were some feedback loops because they got some stops, but generally speaking, that wasn't something really fascinating tactically. The other run was. And so at the end of the third quarter, the Knicks are doing well. They're they kind of took some control after that run. And I thought they were looking good in the third quarter. I'll talk about why the Heat stayed close. But then Mike Brown did something pretty fascinating. So Spoelstra mostly had his bench guards in, and Mike Brown goes to the trio of Jalen Brunson, Tyler Kolek, and Jordan Clarkson all playing together. And so then OG and Mitchell Robinson were the 4 and the 5. And
that was a group that was really important in the NBA Cup too. Jared Dubin and I talked about that game a little bit on Friday, and he thought that was important because of the pressure that the Spurs were putting on to give them more ball handlers.
That's a great point. And the other thing that I thought, the other reason why I thought it was really, really good timing from Mike Brown, I brought up that Spoelstra didn't really have his main guards on the floor. And, the Heat, part of what they're doing this year is that they have initiation from a lot of different places on the floor, is that the Heat didn't have the personnel, even with this LaRochian offense, to really exploit the defensive collective limitations. And they still had Mitchell Robinson back there. And so that group, the ball was moving extremely well. They were getting good shots almost every single time down, and they weren't getting attacked enough defensively for it to be a really big issue. And when somebody got beat, they were able to cover up for enough. And so I thought that run, it didn't salt away the game because it got close again late, but the process of it I thought was really good. And then it ended up yielding some positive results for them.
Yeah, one thing that sticks out to me from the stats of this game is that Miami actually had a big advantage in second chance points. That's where the Knicks, of course, killed the Spurs in the Cup final. Only 5 second chance plays, 7 second chance points. Miami had 24 second chance points on 15 plays. But the Knicks also were able to keep pace in transition with Miami, where those numbers were pretty much equal. 26 transition points for the Heat, 21 for New York. So both teams were able to keep up with each other's specialties. And with Miami not dominating in the floor game, they really just were not able to keep up with the brilliance of the Knicks half-court offense.
Brunson going for 47 was a big part of that. But yeah, the Knicks 1.24 points per half court offensive play, and they were getting a lot of good stuff. I thought that Brunson was masterful, and Davion Mitchell has a big reputation, but I thought he didn't do much to stop Jalen Brunson from getting to his spots. And this was not Brunson living at the free throw line. He took 11, but it wasn't, that kind of game, which part of why it was so watchable was that. But I do think that the Knicks, some of that big 1.24 half court offensive rating was some shot making. Mikal Bridges was 6 of 7 from 3. A couple of those were pretty tough pulls. Josh Hart had like a miracle 3 late, which pretty much sealed the victory. And so I thought that that overstates how good the Knicks were offensively a little bit, but it also gets into one of the other dualities of this game, which is one of the key figures in it was Kel'el Ware. And Kel'el Ware was phenomenal offensively. 11 of 15 from the field, 28 points in 35 minutes. But the Heat were outscored by 6 points during the time he was on the floor. And some of that was the non-Bam minutes of the, Kel'el Ware being there. And so the Knicks, particularly when it was just Ware, they weren't being stopped from some of their stuff. Like the Heat were making some of their things harder, but they weren't preventing good shots. And so I thought that where it was really the duality of him, where this was the best offensive game I've seen from him, full stop. He was drilling his threes, was 5 of 7, some from the corner, some from the arc. And he had some nice assertive stuff inside. He beat Mitchell Robinson for an offensive rebound and put it back with a dunk. That was really impressive.
Yeah, but six offensive rebounds for Ware, 19 total.
Yeah, Kel'el Ware had more offensive rebounds than New York Knicks did, and Mitchell Robinson played 22 minutes in this game. And I thought,
and also obviously he must have been pretty decent. Now, part of it was the Knicks are just scoring every time anyway, but to hold Mitchell Robinson, he only had 2 offensive rebounds when Kel'el Ware was on the floor, and they overlapped for 16 minutes in this game.
And so I thought that Ware did a number of different things right, but you just don't really feel him that much defensively. There was a play where Brunson he beat his man with a cut. That's the original sin. Like Brunson should not be able to get all the way to the free throw line with the cut. But then Kel'el Ware just doesn't step up, and Brunson just gets an easy finish. And it's just like those are the sorts of plays that Kel'el Ware is going to need to get better, because the offensive game is so tantalizing. Like I mean, you saw it in this one. It wasn't just the jump shooting. He got some stuff around the basket. He wasn't getting fouled. Like there's a little bit of that, but he's way more assertive than like DeAndre Ayton, who we've criticized a lot. Like I think Ware has he doesn't have the like passing of like a dominant offensive player, but this was an example of what he can do on that end. And so this was I'm not blaming Kel'el Ware for the -6 that he'd had in his minutes, but you did see a little bit of that because the Knicks were very effective on offense. And part of the reason why was because when they were getting downhill, and that was not Kel'el's part, he wasn't taking it away. And so I thought that it was a fascinating game for Ware because so many things went well, but not everything went well.
Yeah. Now, the Knicks didn't get on top of the basket when he was out there. They were very good from floater range, 9 of 12, upper paint. If Cooper Moorhead's covering a game, we got to use the word.
Have to use upper paint.
But yeah, when Ware was on the floor, 8 of 15 at the rim, 9 of 12 in the upper paint for New York. And they tried, I'm sure, to keep him out of pick and roll by putting him on Hart. Was Brunson getting much at his expense, in your opinion? Like utilizing him in pick and roll where he just couldn't, they had to play a coverage and Brunson was just running free, or was he getting his points some other way?
Not in pick and roll. No, they weren't really doing that kind of stuff, but Brunson was picking on kind of whoever was there. Davion Mitchell didn't really deter him too much, but they would, and it wasn't even a ton of like, as I was seeing it, just like running a screen, but Brunson, there were some isolation attacks. Also, Brunson did some nice work in transition. Not that the Knicks were like, you brought up that they ran reasonably successfully in this game. So I didn't think it was Kel'el Ware getting exploited. It was more that he wasn't cleaning up every mess. And so like it's a smaller level problem, but the Knicks didn't need to go to that to necessarily to generate good shots. So like it wasn't a key part of their offense.
What else stuck out to you here?
Another good game from Tyler Kolek. He had a play that I really liked late. So he was out there and he was pushing the ball in transition. He didn't make the beautiful pass to OG in the corner three like he did in the Cup championship, but he just understood that it wasn't there. And then he passed off to Karl-Anthony Towns. They eventually worked it, and I think they got a 3 on that possession. It's just like, okay, understanding that you're trying to get something good, but if you don't get something good, that's totally fine. OG Anunoby, I thought he was pretty quiet overall in the game, but he had this ridiculous sequence, which was big in the fourth quarter, where he blocked a shot as a help defender, runs the floor, beats everyone down, and gets a dunk, comes back and gets a block on ball. For those were his 2 blocks of the game. And so that was a big part. I think the Knicks had like a 7-0, 9-0 run right in that sequence, and OG was at the center of it. So I thought that for the Knicks, those were the main stories. This was a very passive Karl-Anthony Towns game. He only took 5 shots from the field, got a couple of offensive fouls, just seemed a little bit out of sorts. He had a big defensive play on Norm Powell late, but overall, you didn't feel him that much. Some of that might be Bam Adebayo, but Karl-Anthony Towns just he didn't really have it. Then for the Heat, I brought up Kel'el Ware. I thought he was the most important tactical wrinkle for the Heat in this game, but no Tyler hero in this one. So you knew some other guys were going to step up, and in the third quarter, it really was Norm Powell. And Powell, I brought this up a couple of weeks ago. Like, he has really saved them this year. And I thought the way I described it in my notes was it was the save us Norm offense, because he was the guy who could create an advantage of their starting 5. He had 19 points in the third quarter, but it was all like self-created tough stuff. He had some tough threes, got to the basket. And so Powell, like he didn't have quite that juice at the end of the game. He scored 19 of his 22 points in a single quarter, but that was what kept them alive. Because I brought up the Knicks were scoring it really well in the third, and the reason they were able to stay in touch was because Powell was that ridiculous. So he didn't do it necessarily in the rest of the game, but he had that huge stretch. In the first half, I thought that it was Jaime Jaquez who was really surprising me. So Jaquez, you have a little bit. I have a little bit of UCLA bias in here, but like, I didn't think that he was going to be able to do his dribble attack stuff on some of the Knicks' best guys, and he didn't every single time. But he had 2 nice plays where he beat OG Anunoby off the dribble. One he got the finish, one he didn't, and he was 9 of 15 in the game, and he wasn't doing it the way I expected, where it's like you get him in a good matchup. The Knicks are playing small some of the time. He did that at times, but at times it was just, okay, these are the pins that are in front of me. I'm going to try to knock them down anyway. And when you consider that Hero was out, so they need to lean more on Powell in the starting lineup, and Davion's playing a lot with the starters, there weren't as many other guys to try to generate those advantages. I barely noticed, like, Jonas played 12 minutes, but you barely felt him out there. He took a couple of shots, but he wasn't.
He had a nice game in their previous one, but this time, and so it was kind of a surprise to see him in the rotation again. But yeah, he was ineffective in this one.
Yeah, I think they just needed somebody else to kind of do some of the ball handling stuff. Drew Smith had a couple of moments, and then Fontecchio, like, he had this just molten stretch early in the year where he's hitting threes, and he got fouled on he got a 3-shot foul, which the Knicks shouldn't have committed in the first place. Like, they overreacted. As good of a shooter as he is, you don't want to foul a shooter that good on a 3. But then the other big thing for me, Bam Adebayo had a nice defensive game at times, but I was very disappointed in him offensively. And the Knicks, they do play size. They have Karl-Anthony Towns, and they play Mitchell Robinson. They've been largely staggering those guys, like kind of I call it a stagger plus. Bam Adebayo took 2 shots inside 5 feet, and then he took 9 shots outside of 5 feet, and 4 from the upper paint, 2 mid-rangers, 3 threes, which he missed all 3 of those threes. And he was passive. Like, at his worst, he was passive, and at his best, he was aggressive but ineffective. And the Knicks aren't the best matchup for him, and they had to throw some defensive resources at Bam. But he, like, you would have thought that he could potentially get some stuff, and they were throwing, like, it's not like Mikal Bridges can guard him, but like the Knicks didn't feel Bam Adebayo as much as they could have. And Ware's having a hot game and all this other stuff, but it wasn't like he was creating the advantage and then passing off. He just wasn't creating any advantages at all. So I was very disappointed in Bam overall.
Yeah, this is now kind of a second year of this from Bam Adebayo, where he just has not really been able to take the next step offensively. We thought maybe that would be shooting the three, where I think he's been good enough that he has to get guarded out there. And that is an important aspect for their offense. And it's important for his ability to play with Ware. And there certainly are some growing pains now with that lineup. Spo went away from it for a time. And, they still have only one win in December right now, which is pretty ugly. So, the shooting is something, but yeah, we always thought that there could be this possibility of him being this off the dribble attacker where he's just so physical. He goes through guys, he gets the line, you get the wrong guy on him, it's going to be an issue. And instead it's always some kind of fadeaway from 9 feet, 12 feet, where he was 1 of 4 again. And this one, Jaquez was awesome though, driving to the basket. He was a total of 8 out of 12 in the paint and got fouled 4 times in the paint as well. So that was impressive. He had, though it seemed maybe that the league had kind of been catching up to what he was doing a little bit as well.
Before we leave this game, I have one other stat. I looked this up while we were talking. So remember, the NBA Cup championship game does not count for these stats.
Right.
The trio of Brunson, Kolek, and Jordan Clarkson have played 23 regular season possessions together. Before tonight, they had a negative 73.9 net rating, but that's going to improve after this one.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing that Brunson putting up 47 points like this against a good defense is just kind of what's expected.
He was fantastic. I mean, just dominant. We talked about that 1.24 half court offensive rating, and Brunson was at the center of all of that.
Well, and 6 of 13 on threes is really impressive, and 9 of 13 on twos. It really is scoring in every possible way. Also had 8 assists in this one
and
too.
0 turnovers.
So Miami's fundamentals. So we have them here before we move on. Now down to 15 and 14, 1 and 4 since we last did their stats. Net rating is still 9th in the NBA, plus 2.8. They are 15th on offense and 5th on defense, projecting for 45 wins, now 85% chance of making the playoffs. So speaking of the playoffs, oh wait, never mind. Let's talk about the Nets and Raptors that took place today. We'll start with the Nets stats.
Brooklyn, after their rousing win in Toronto, they are 8 and 19 on the season, 2 and 2 since the last 15-60. Their negative 7.5 net rating is 4th from last. They're 26th on defense, 25th on offense, and BPI projects them to go 25 and 57. That would be the 13 seed in the East.
Yeah, it was a rousing win for Brooklyn. I'm not sure that Toronto ever roused today with their 82.7 offensive rating for the game. Brooklyn,
Yikes.
99 offensive rating, and they won it quite comfortably. They won it quite comfortably despite turning it over on 23% of their possessions for the game and only getting up 84 true shots in the game, which is a very low number. But they did go 14 to 36 from downtown, and the Raps were 10 out of 37. Michael Porter Jr. continues to be really effective for Brooklyn. He had 24 in this one, 4 of 8 from 3. But really what stuck out to me the most was some of his passing. He had really multiple good looks, finding Nick Claxton underneath. Claxton, I thought, was pretty good offensively as well. He was looking to duck in. And that was one of the things that stuck out was this is really a switching game. And Jakob Poeltl had missed a couple straight with that back issue, came back, only made it through 6 minutes in the first half before he had to withdraw once more. This back issue has just been totally derailing his season at this point in time. And so the Raps, no Poeltl, no RJ Barrett, of course. They got really thin, which we'll talk more about later. And that hurt them a ton in the fourth quarter in particular. But this is kind of a switching game. So you had Claxton trying to duck in against Emmanuel quickly or Ochai Agbaji. Those are a lot of what we're seeing, those kinds of plays. And then Brooklyn was doing all their switching on the other end. And that was really where the tete-a-tete was in the third and fourth quarter. Toronto was down 10. Then they make a 15-0 run spanning the third and fourth quarter. It was against an all-bench unit of, And would you like to know who's coming off of Brooklyn's bench? Perhaps you would. Maybe you can tell people. But those 5 players were in the game at the end of the third quarter.
So it is Nolan Traore, Tyrese Martin, Zaire Williams, Danny Wolf, and Day'Ron Sharpe.
Yeah, and they still were doing plenty of switching during that period. We even saw Danny Wolf switching on to Emmanuel quickly. You got to stop on him in the fourth quarter. But that group got totally smoked. 11-0 run to end the third, followed by another quick 4 points to force another timeout. Jordy Fernandez did go back to Claxton and Porter Jr. and Yegor Joman at the start of the fourth, and those guys eventually were able to restore order. Your Nets starters, by the way, in this game, for those who have not been following them particularly closely, were Terrence Mann, Yegor, Porter Jr. at the 3, Noah Kalani at the 4, and Nick Claxton at center. And then it was really Joman and the Nets 3-point shooting that immediately got them back into a double-digit lead. They outscored Toronto 29-16 in the fourth. And I really like what I saw from Joman as a 3-point shooter. We've been deriding his lack of 2-point game all season, and he was a solid 2 of 2 from 2-point range in this one. But 4 of 8 from 3, and he made 3 of them in the fourth. Some very aggressive pulls. What are his numbers on from 3 on the season right now, Danny? Because he's
Joman, it's
every time I see him, it's good.
So he's taking 8.5 threes per 36 and making 34% of them.
Yeah, so there definitely is a level of aggression, and 34% is not amazing, but 8.5 per 36. We've seen guys have some big numbers in that stat on tanking teams, and it's not maybe as indicative of what it might be on a real team that he's actually taking that many, but certainly looked pretty confident getting into it. I thought also just from a body standpoint, he looks like a little bit stronger, a little more cut up than what we've seen from him in the past as a prospect and in summer league. So it looks like his development is coming along some. Now, it's kind of funny that he's mostly a shooter at this point. Really has not been doing much passing at all. I'm going to pull up his total creation in a second here on the season, or maybe you can while I'm talking, because I'd be interested to see that on him as well. So back to the tactical thing I alluded to earlier. The end of the third, Emmanuel quickly was absolutely dicing up the Nets switching by hitting the roll man quickly. They weren't able to get underneath the roll man on these switches, and quickly was throwing a beautiful bounce pass out into space. He also had one in transition at the start of the fourth to Colin Murray Boyles. So then Jordy Fernandez switched things up, and I think maybe he called another timeout right at the start of the fourth to say that they're going to just start pulling in way more from the wings and taking, even though they're switching, also bringing a third guy into the action to make sure the pass to the roll man wasn't as easy. And that was a key adjustment for the Nets because the Raptors were shooting so poorly from 3 in the end. And so they're able to seize control from there. And then on the other end, Toronto was doing some switching as well, but they just didn't really have the size to do that particularly well with no Pirtle. Obviously, he's not really a switch guy, but they decided to go with Barnes at center, Ingram at the 4, and then 3 guards. And that was just too limited in terms of their size, and also as groups that they hadn't really been together very much. I think if it had been me, I probably would have gone Murray Boyles there instead if they really were switching and just tried to win the game defensively, because none of what they were doing on offense was working well either. But there's one play where Brandon Ingram just got blown by Terrence Mann on the perimeter, just kind of sauntered after him, and then Mann was under the basket. Ingram could have easily switched onto Noah Kalani, who was coming down the lane. Ingram just kind of stood there, started blaming Jamal Shed for not doing something or other, and Claxton just got a big dunk. So I was pretty unimpressed with the Raptors, their communication in the fourth quarter in particular, defensively, and they needed to be really locked in with the personnel they had on the floor. They weren't able to do that.
I was not able to pull the total creation number, but I can give the kind of the basketball reference one. So
is he not in there because he's a rookie?
I think that might be the case. It was either that or I'm not good enough at searching it. Both of which are possible.
No, here we go. All right, so he is actually higher than I thought. He's at 15% passing creation on the season. Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's actually pretty good for a rookie.
So for me, as somebody who didn't watch this game, had a different one on.
Well, you should be happy.
I am. The stat that jumps out to me as wild is that the Toronto Raptors had 10 second chance opportunities and scored a total of 1 point on those 10 chances. Yes, that is a 0.1 points per play off of an offensive rebound.
Yeah, and part of their bad 3-point shooting is certainly a big part of that. So 81 points against this Nets team, and this is a Nets group that certainly has tightened things up and is playing much, much better than they were early on in the year. But still, they were, for a month of this season, they were on pace to be the worst defense of all time. And the Raps just, like, Brandon Ingram really just couldn't particularly get free against anyone. He's going to take I think again this season, despite being in Toronto, he's essentially last among high volume players in our shot quality metric. And, it's like 46, 47%, maybe even worse than it's been in the past. DeRozan's right up there too. And then I would say the other thing too for me is Scotty Barnes going 3 out of 10, negative 22 in 33 minutes. You would think that this is a group that he could just overpower, especially if they're switching, and he just really wasn't able to generate much, hardly at all. And quickly had some moments, but I saw his best moments and talked about him in that period, had 17 points, but the rest of the game, he was pretty miserable. I thought it was one of the best passing games I've ever seen from him with 10 assists. So, yeah, we could do the Raps fundamentals before we move on.
The Toronto Raptors are now 17-13 on the season, a disappointing 2-3 since the last 15-60. 10th in net rating, plus 2.4. 17th on offense and 6th on defense, and BPI projects them to win 42 games, which would be the 8th seed in the East.
All right, where would you like to go next?
Let's go to Chicago.
I was just there.
Mm-hmm.
They're 13-15. Actually starting to pick things up a little bit. 4-1. They played Cleveland a couple of times.
No one circles and uncircles and recircles the wagons quite like the Chicago Bulls.
Yeah. Yeah, their usual mid-December run. They are 19th in net rating, negative 2.9, 16th on offense. That's really been where they've been making the improvements in this 5-game stretch, and they are 23rd on defense. They project for the 11th seed still. Oh, that's really disappointing. 33 wins and 4% chance of making the playoffs. And weirdly enough, finally, there have been some actual trade rumors involving Coby White. Supposedly the Wolves are interested. He's had injuries to both calves, but has been pretty effective when he's played. What did you see as you dove into him?
I mean, I'm encouraged because you and I both want to see Coby White on a good team by the reporting from Mark Stein that the Bulls are more open to trading Coby White than they were previously. And so White, he's a fascinating player. He's only played he played in his 12th game this year in their wild 152-150 win regulation in Atlanta over the Hawks on Sunday. And so with White,
yeah, that game is probably responsible for their entire increase in offensive rating from the last time we looked at them. They were in the 20s last time.
Yeah, and so they're moved up. And so White, I was fascinated because he hasn't played a ton this year, so you get some small sample size stuff in there. But he's 58% true shooting on 30 usage. So this usage is bumped from 24.5 to 30 this year. And so he's taking more shots, and it's not the three. he's taking the same 3-point attempts per 36 minutes. 8.6 is a ton, but he's taking a lot. And instead, it's that it's twos in the free throw line, which is really interesting. The film on this is pretty fascinating too. So he's 10.1 twos per 36 minutes. That's not like a ton for like the crazy high usage guys, but for a player like Coby White had done before, that's there. But the free throw line, he's currently 9th in the NBA in free throw attempts per 36 minutes. And every guy above Coby White is a player that we know for free throw drawing. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Giannis, etc. And so that is a huge part of Coby White's success. And so last year, he took 4.3 shots inside 5 feet per game and made 61% of them. This year, that's up to 6 shots inside 5 feet, making 66%. So he's taking more, making 5% more. That's huge. And so you could kind of wonder, well, is that going to be a part of this moving forward? Like, is that something? And like, when you watch the film, like Coby White is not, he's not like physically dominant in the way that some of these like free throw guys are. So I think that but he's good at working with what he has. He plays hard. He understands the advantages. And so what I would say watching the film is that there's more truth in this than I maybe expected, but going up to 8.6 free throw attempts per 36 minutes, like that's something. And remember, he's playing a lot of his minutes with Josh Giddey, so it's not just every down quarterback pushing this stuff every time. And so I thought that overall, like I was definitely intrigued by it, and something that surprised. So that's like the basis, really, the heart of what Coby White is doing this year. And I think that a lot of it is, it's a version of sustainable. Like you could do something like this, and if he had his own team, you need him to do a little bit more. But they do benefit. The Bulls have, in part because of Zach Collins' injury, they've played with a lot of spacing at the 5, and I think that has helped Coby White, even though he's done well in some of the other lineups. And so you wonder about how this is going to translate. Well, it's a lot easier to draw free throws. It's a lot easier to get these shots inside the arc when the other team doesn't really have a place to have their 5 inside. And so like, I think that it is a favorable ecosystem for him, but White deserves credit for maximizing it in that ecosystem.
Yeah, and when you think of where he was early on as a prospect, finishing and getting to the basket was one of the things you were concerned about with him, where it was just he kind of had short arms. He was always willing to be physical, but he was trying to be physical in the air and just wasn't getting rewarded with the call. And that led to a lot of running hook shots, slammed off the backboard, getting his shot blocked. And so he's been one of the guys who's most benefited, I would say, from this revolution in footwork, which maybe, the revolution shouldn't be televised quite as much as it is, because it's maybe getting a lot of hand. Ben Taylor had a great video on that recently, in the sense that they're just not calling travels on those plays where guys are dragging their foot. They're putting the same foot down again. They're moving their pivot foot. Obviously, they're also using these slow steps as an excuse to push off. But White has always been willing to be physical. And so adding that, and then also some of the footwork stuff, the slow steps, Euro steps, all of that has been really effective for him to where he now is one of the better drivers. And the free throw line is one of the things that really separates him from maybe someone that we would have thought was in the same category of him coming into the year, Anthony Simons, who has never really gotten to the line, never really been physical getting to the basket. But I would like to see him, as you said, on more of a real team, right? If you're talking about a possible trade, okay, let's say Minnesota gets him. Well, so is he running pick and roll as Rudy Gobert now? Because that's not really ever what he's been asked to do, right? There would be an adjustment period there. I think he's going to shoot it better than the 29%. Like, he could be on pace to end up having a monster efficiency year if he just keeps up what he's doing as a driver, and in the 3-point shooting reverts somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, Coby White's he's a career 37% 3-point shooter. I didn't see anything in the jumper film to make me think that it's worse or that it's tougher. Like, I think he can improve a lot there, can regress to the mean, or at least something close to it over the course of the year, and that will make his number spike even if the free throw attempts drop down a little bit. Something else I found fascinating going through, because I was looking at like, well, what would be the hallmarks of a Coby White team if he ever against his own team? And I was looking at kind of the combinations and the transition, because that's always something I've thought about with Coby White. And they run the configuration with Coby White and Josh Giddey that runs the least is both of those guys playing together. And I would have thought it would have been different. Some of that is who you're playing against. Like, those groups most often play against starters. 15.4% transition frequency. That's a little bit below the NBA average. They run more when Coby White plays without Josh Giddey, and then even more when Giddey's without White, or when neither of them is out there. Those groups suck offensively, but they run a ton. Trae Jones and other guys, like, they're trying. That's what they can do. And so but something that's really encouraging for White, and this is something surely that his advocates would argue in terms of being on a new team, is that when Coby White plays without both Josh Giddey and Trae Jones, the Bulls' offensive rating is a 122, despite them being kind of terrible in transition, but they're making 54% of their corner threes on huge volume. Now, White helps generate some of those, but that's unsustainable. You're not gonna, the volume can stay, but you're not gonna make 54% on those in any sort of real sample.
Well, and also we should keep in mind that he hasn't really ever been stress tested on defense as well. It doesn't, because everyone on the Bulls pretty much is bad. And so when he's the one guy that teams are going after constantly, again, say on a team like the Wolves, what does that look like? Is he really going to hold up there? He doesn't get attacked as much because you just don't necessarily have to target him as much either. But he doesn't really do much as a help defender. He'll still try to take some charges every now and then, but usually not succeed because the Bulls legendarily are a terrible charge-taking team. So, yeah. Oh, good. Sorry, I didn't realize you were done. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I want to kind of. So I mentioned some of the stuff I saw in the film, but the big takeaway watching a lot of his just randomized possessions is that the film is good, but it's not quite what I want to see from somebody who I'm like giving the keys to as a lead guy on a team with expectations. Now, I think that he can fit in an ecosystem, but like the numbers, I brought up the offensive rating when he's on and Giddey's off and all that type of stuff. But you're not seeing that kind of like the wow creation or everything else. The free throw drawing is great, and I wonder about that in a different sample. But is that a fair bar for him? And so it depends on what you're trying to trade for. If you're trying to trade for a cog in the machine, absolutely. I think he can shoot a lot better. I think he can fit in. But if it's like to be your offensive linchpin, I'm not quite seeing it there. The passing, he's a good passer. He's a willing passer, but he's not a phenomenal one. And it's the kind of, you've sometimes used the oh shit test, and like Coby White's drives aren't that. Maybe if he keeps getting fouled like this, they will be, but so it's good. It's good. And he's done a great job of becoming a better version of himself. And if some of the stuff stays, then I'll be more effusive about it. But in the idea of, is he a problem? Is he somebody that you have to deal with on teams with expectations? I'm not quite there yet, even though I'm super impressed with what he's done.
Well, the Bulls have been a nemesis to the Cleveland Cavaliers of late, Danny.
And the nemesis to the point the Cavs are now 15-14, a disheartening 1-3 since the last 15-60. They're down to 1.6 net rating. That's just above league average. 10th on offense, 13th on defense, and remember, Evan Mobley's going to be out for a while. BPI now has them as the 6th seed in the East, 46-36.
Yeah, it seems like BPI is finally starting to get convinced that there's a problem. It appears, however, that Dan Gilbert may also believe that there is a problem. Chris Fedor ominously reporting that Dan Gilbert may be getting more involved once more, and that is... it's a bit of a wild card for this group. So I decided that I would put myself in the position of trying to advise Dan Gilbert on, give him an assessment of what's gone wrong and how, if there's a realistic path out of this with the group that they have. There are some positive signs. Right, 6.2 net rating with Evan Mobley on the court. Now, of course, that was well into double digits last year with Donovan Mitchell on the floor. They're a +6 also. And then when those guys are off the floor, it gets rough. Mobley off, -3.5. Mitchell off, -5 or so. Other reasons for possible optimism: Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen together. Allen's had the finger issue. Mobley now out with the calf issue. Their defense is basically last in the league since he went out. But those two guys together, still a plus 10.8 in 456 possessions. There have been moments where Allen hasn't closed, but with some of their wing depth denuded, I'm not sure how smart that is, frankly. And so those are some reasons for at least relative optimism. Now, this is a team that was dominant last year, 64 wins, and had one of the most dominant first-round playoff series that we've ever seen. Of course, they ran into the Cavs buzzsaws, but they also had Mobley and Garland with injuries during that, and DeAndre Hunter as well. So some of the fundamentals look like they're actually working. Of the fundamental things that you really can't change, the big concern is Darius Garland, where he just has struggled immensely this year. He's at 32% on threes versus 40% last year. He's actually driving more this season, playing 30 minutes a game. Last year, he was at 12.8 drives. This is per the Sport Radar stats. Your mileage may vary compared to NBA.com, but he has 14 drives per game this year, 12.8 last year, but he was very efficient, both the team and he on those drives last year. And overall, Garland, I mean, you can talk about his top line numbers here, Danny, of just how much he has struggled so far. And he looked okay right when he came back. Then he re-injured the toe again. Then he's been back. He's always seems to kind of be messing with it a little bit when he's playing. What have they gotten from him in an overall sense this year?
It's concerning. I mean, so Garland last year, I had him as a second team All NBA player. I thought he was the best offensive Cavalier. 60% true shooting on 27 usage. That 60% true shooting is 51 this season. And it's both, as you said with the drives, it's inside the arc and beyond the arc. So he's taking the same number of threes per 36 as last year, a little bit above 8. 40% last year, 32% this year. But then twos, 53% to 43%, and getting to the line a little bit more. Part of that's, trying to, those, you talked about the drive numbers, but not nearly enough to make up for those, when you drop almost 10 points in effectiveness on both 2 and 3, you're going to nosedive in terms of your overall impact.
Yeah, his finishing has never been unbelievable as a finisher, but got into the 60s in his best years. That's down around the rim now, and that he's in the low 50s there. His floater game hasn't been going in either. Maybe that's something that could improve. Maybe the 3-point shooting could improve. He actually, I mean, maybe the one thing you could say is that he at least is getting into the lane based on some of these numbers. And then another thing is that part of why we thought he had a rock solid All NBA case last year was how well they played when he was on the floor, particularly without Mitchell. And then this year they have a negative 7.3 net rating when he's on the floor. When he doesn't play, they're plus 5.2, and they're way worse on both offense and defense when he's out there. If he's not going to be a dominant offensive player, then the pairing of he and Mitchell really gets called into question once again. And as does Donovan Mitchell's ability to potentially be a point guard, because you're not going to play Donovan Mitchell with another point guard because he's already a small guard. And then your offense is just not going to be that great. Donovan Mitchell makes the offense pretty good just through his insane shot making, but he's just not as good as Pete Garland at setting guys up. And overall, though, the Cavs just haven't been able to score without Mitchell on the floor. They're 15.5 points per 100 worse when he's on offense. But even when he is on the floor, they're 119, which is good, but not unbelievable. And he's having a great shooting season. So the other thing that I would say has been the big problem is just the soft underbelly of the team, which they basically didn't have last year, right? Max Strus hasn't played hardly at all. Sam Merrill has been really good when he's played, but he's has this weird hand injury that he's still out with. Lonzo Ball has been a complete disaster, and Ty Jerome hasn't played at all yet. He's missed basically 2 entire months. The Grizz with this high grade calf strain, but Lonzo Ball 42% true shooting, 2.7 turnovers per 36 for a guy with his offensive role is also unacceptably bad. So he's just been one of the worst offensive players in basketball. And yeah, if he gives them some good team defense, great, but that's not enough when he's really supposed to be their third guard. He's been healthier maybe than expected. Hilariously, they're such an injured team that Lonzo Ball is one of the healthier players on the team, but they're missing last year's Jerome. Not that this year's Jerome would have given them anything. And then DeAndre Hunter also has not looked very good in a starting role. They even experimented with playing Jalen Tyson. When Mobley comes back, I think I would probably go with Jalen Tyson rather than DeAndre Hunter, because DeAndre Hunter still, his raison d'etre is get to some mid-rangers and isolate. And he's not looking to take spot up threes as much. He'll do it. He's not looking to, I think at this point, Tyson's probably a better individual defender than DeAndre Hunter. And more importantly, he's just committed himself to being that kind of player to get on the floor. He's not making $24 million a year. So maybe Hunter could be someone that they could look to trade. So I think the Garland thing, I'm not sure they can fix. Mobley hasn't been as assertive in the lane. We'll see, right? I mean, you got to just hope that he gets back to where he was last year. But I do think just getting guys back, which may never happen, but in theory, if you're looking for to continue to be a Cavs Pollyanna the way I've been, that's kind of what you're looking for. So I think maybe they need to do something at the trade deadline, but more, I would say, around the margins. And then if Darius Garland just can't get back to being close to what he was, then maybe you really look at some major changes this offseason. And same thing with Jared Allen, who has not been nearly as efficient this year as he's been in the past either. So that's my thought on the Cavs, really.
And one of the other kind of the road not traveled elements of the Cavs story is you brought it up with Ty Jerome, which is the guys they couldn't retain, like Ty Jerome and George Niang. Both those guys have barely played for their current teams. Like Ty Jerome hasn't played at all. George Niang's been out almost the entire season too. So it's like if they had kept those guys, and you can't presume that the injuries would have been different. That's not really a fair thing to do for the exercise. Well, then they'd be missing them too. So it's hard. But Lonzo, I mean, one of the stats for me is like they have a 111.8 offensive rating when Lonzo's on the floor and Donovan Mitchell is not. And some of those minutes have had some pretty limited guys other than him. You know, we've had some Tyrese Proctors and everything else. But, you know, you would hope that Lonzo could do that. And those groups have been horrendous shooting the ball. But it's just like as you said, he's been one of the worst offensive players in the league so far this year. So it's a lot to deal with. And I understand Dan Gilbert. This team is extraordinarily expensive and they have a lot committed, not only for this year, but for a lot longer than that. But considering how well they played last year, I don't see the point. Like, I would be disappointed in Gilbert if he tried to do some significant cost shedding this season. If this season and playoffs go poorly, then absolutely, I think you'd be justified to do it. But the other thing with the Cavs is, unless there's somebody who really likes DeAndre Hunter, there isn't a clean way for them to get off of a lot of money without getting significantly worse. Now, like you could say, like you could get off Lonzo Ball for this year if you could find a taker who fits in the mid-level exception, but that might be the aberration. But I don't think a team's taking Lonzo Ball on out of charity right now, considering how horrendous he's been.
Yeah, Cavs, by the way, what do they have to trade? They can trade a 2030 swap, 2031 first rounder, or 2032 swap potentially, and then their 2033 pick at the draft, unless they can get out of the second apron, which they'll be very hard pressed to do, as you mentioned, would be frozen at the draft. So let's move on to one of your teams here. Where you want to go next?
Let's go to the Orlando Magic, who we will be breaking down on the NBA strategy stream on Monday night. That is it's Magic Warriors, so it is a 7 Pacific, 10 Eastern start. So for you on the East Coast, unless you're in Orlando, it might be a little bit late, but we'll have a lot of fun breaking it down.
Yeah, they're 16-12, 2-2 in their last 4. Net rating 2.0 is 11th. They are 12th on offense, 10th on defense, projecting for 50 wins, 3rd seed in the East, 98% chance of making the playoffs. And Anthony Black has really been up and down this year as a defender. He seems to have come into his own. He's gotten stronger. One-on-one, he's been very solid. I think to the point even that you would maybe when he plays with Suggs, you would rather put him on the ball handler and let Suggs be more of an off-ball gambler and roamer, and also maybe save Suggs a little bit for offense, or just to actually still have him be on the floor. He's 22 right now. This is his third season. What do you make of what's going on so far?
I put in that I wanted to do an Anthony Black breakdown because we did these mailbags. I put it in 3 weeks ago when because we keep these outlines persistent. And I did that at the point when Anthony Black had 60% true shooting in October, 56% in November, was looking like a really big difference maker for the Magic. And unfortunately, Black still providing on the defensive end, but he's had a super cold December, 47% true shooting, 21% on threes. So his season-long numbers are actually pretty close to what they were last year, 53% true shooting on 21 usage. And even with that, so you're like, oh, the top line numbers are pretty close. There are some things that are different, and I think they're worth spending some time on. So the biggest one, and this will parallel to an extent Coby White, is that Anthony Black is improved as a finisher and his overall rim pressure. So last year, he is playing more per game. But last year, Anthony Black, 3.2 attempts inside 5 feet, converted 56% of them. This year, that 3.2 is 4.9, and he's making 63% of them. And that includes, despite Anthony Black having a higher usage rate, dunks are a higher part of his shot diet. So he's taking more shots, but he's also getting more dunks. So he's getting down the basket. He's doing more in transition. And unsurprisingly, when a guy's doing better rim pressure, that also is translating into more free throw attempts. And so, he's up to 4.6 per 36. That's not amazing, but it is a significant improvement. And now Black, he needs to do better than 69% from the line. And it's a concern because Anthony Black last year, he was 76%. You're like, oh, okay, you're doing that. But he hadn't been a good free throw shooter really at any point in his collegiate or NBA career other than that year. So if we're getting more that he's like a 70% guy, but guys improve on that. We said he's 22. And Black, he's not taking really many long twos, just 14 shots from beyond 16 feet this year. He sucks on them, so it's pretty good to not take those at all. And what's fascinating, I brought up how he's taking more shots, is that his creation, like his passing, is actually down this year. Some of that is by who he's playing with and all that, but Anthony Black's dropped, his assists per 36 has dropped, his turnovers have stayed the same. So the increase in like basketball reference usage, all that, is just by taking more shots. And that's potentially important long term because he's playing more of his minutes with the starter. But that watching the film, what really stuck out to me was that there's a lot to like about Anthony Black's game. He's an unselfish player. He can be aggressive. His instincts are good. We both love him defensively for a guard, but he's not the overwhelming athlete that he needs to be to overcome some of his limitations. So two guys that I thought about a lot when I was watching Anthony Black's offensive film were his own teammate, Jalen Suggs, and Stephon Castle, who we've talked about a lot on the pod. And so Castle, who we broke down in that mailbag 1560, like he's grown a lot in terms of imposing his will as a driver. He's grown a lot as a passer. And I think Anthony Black started at a stronger point as a passer than Castle did, but Castle's grown. But Black is not the level of athlete that Stephon Castle is. And so he doesn't really put that much heat on the defense. And so you get into the circumstance, like the film on Anthony Black, when he has an advantage, is pretty good. Like he gets downhill, his two dribbles and a good decision stuff is good. He makes the right read. But the question is, on a team that matters, in his circumstances that matter, how is that advantage going to come? So if he's playing, when we're getting into playoff coaching and all this stuff, and he's not shooting any better than he's doing right now. So right now, Anthony Black, he's 25% on pull-up threes, 32.5% on catch and shoot threes. And last year was 35% on catch and shoot, and he didn't take many pull-ups, so the pull-ups aren't doing very well. And so it's basically, so if the advantage is there, he can work with it. But he doesn't need to be guarded that well other than that. And him attacking isn't a 5-alarm fire, even if some of the rim finishing stuff is getting better. And so I thought that there's a lot that I like. I really like Anthony Black as a player, but I just kept on being like, oh man, how is this going to work if the Magic, because the Magic, he's on a team that's high level that's going to be in these circumstances. And so I started getting a little bit scared. There's some bad turnovers. Like there was this play where Black had the ball over his head and he's just kind of surveying and Duncan Robinson rips it and just like, oh God, like that sort of stuff. And the other part is, I mean, we've talked about like, I brought up the two guys, Castle and Suggs. With Suggs, it's the old, like, is the juice worth the squeeze? Like, Suggs is so great to me defensively, even if they're not the same kind of guy, where it's like, sure, you can do that. Also, Suggs is a materially better offensive player than Anthony Black. But there's the combination thing where it's like, you also already have Jalen Suggs on this team. So, like, Anthony Black, when I was watching the film on him, still a guy that I like, but I was like, it's looked more like third guard utility player rather than starter or closer on a team like this that's trying to win the Eastern Conference.
He's definitely on the right trajectory with his three, and I realize he's not shooting it particularly well by the stats right now. And yeah, we did that Philly game where they just everyone had the shooting game of their lives. They totally blew out the Sixers. That was a big reason why they were the number one seed in the NBA Cup. But the overall numbers aren't great, and the stats do watch every game, which obviously we cannot. But his form just looks a lot better, and he's been more aggressive, and also the team is comfortable with him taking it. So he's at 69% from the free throw line right now. He was 76% last year. Also, he's getting to the foul line more, which is important. So I agree with you on the advantage creation, right? Like, he's not shifty. I think he's a good secondary passer. He's great in transition, and his body is filling out. He's had some pretty big dunks in transition this year. I think he's been a big part of the Magic getting much better in transition than they've been before, though Bane is probably and Suggs playing for a whole year are probably the two biggest reasons there. But he's good in transition too. He's getting close to the point where I think he'll at least make shots okay. And yeah, that might end up being a third guard, kind of, all right, he's not really a point guard, not really a shooting guard, because he's not going to be somebody you're running plays for coming off a screen or something like that. His shot mix is pretty interesting, though. You asked me to take a look at the percentage of his threes that are wide open. And uncontested threes, 83% of them are uncontested. And he doesn't shoot a particularly great percentage on that. He's at 29% on uncontested threes. Now, our numbers say that his three-point shot quality is 37%. And that's not as high as like the crazy highest guys, just because he doesn't shoot as much from the corners anymore. He shot 50% of his threes from the corner as a rookie when he was basically barely taking them. Now he's taking about 25% of his threes from the corner, but he still is not very many of them are contested, and they're still not going in. So by the numbers, it hasn't been that great. I'm encouraged by the way he's reworked his form. He's at least capable of getting hot. He is taking them. His team wants him to take them, which is in marked contrast to what it was as a rookie when he was basically, they told him, don't do this. So he still is not at, even a shooting guard or small forward level of 3-point attempts per 36, only 4.6. But I think he's on the right track, and he's made a lot of improvements, and I think he's going to be a valuable rotation player in the playoffs just because of the way he can guard, because they don't really have anyone else. It's Suggs and him, and that's it. They don't have anyone else. There is no KCP on this team anymore. There's no Gary Harris on this team anymore. So he just has to be out there. He has to be their third guard. And I think they've made the right move to start him the last couple of games rather than De Silva with some of the absences that they've had. So I think he's on the right track to be a good player. The question is whether he can fit into their salary structure. Is he going to want $20 million a year? Is he going to say, yeah, pay me like Dyson Daniels? I think there's a possibility he could maybe be better than Dyson Daniels someday. Those guys were drafted in pretty similar ranges to each other in 22 and 23, kind of similar players. So, but I think Black at least is shooting it, which Daniels even is not at this point in time. Anything else you had on him?
Let me take a quick look through my notes, see if there's anything else. There were a couple of nice finishes. Like there was a play where he got it with both Şengün and Steven Adams in good position, and he just got it past them. So there were a few of those that I really liked. And as I said, he's a player I enjoy his connective tissue, and you always root for those guys to succeed, especially when they try hard and are successful defensively. And really, it doesn't have to be on ball. If he can just get to a passable jump shooter, this all works. It all fits together. But we've talked about it with other defense first guards before. You have to do something if you're going to be on a really high level team.
Yeah, and there are a lot of archetypes that he could fit into if he does shoot it better. Like, could he have a similar career path to, say, Derek White? But as someone who's getting their start a lot younger, like, will he become one of the best shooters in the NBA like Derek White? No, I don't think that that's necessarily going to be the case. But could he be what Derek White was when he first got traded to Boston and is still a really effective player? Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. He won't be as good of a rim protector, but I think he'd also be a better on-ball defender than Derek White. Let's get to the Sixers, who are actually starting to become a factor here, Danny.
16-11, 3-1 since the last 15-60. 12th in net rating, +2. 11th on offense, 11th on defense, and projected to be the 5 seed in the East. 47 wins, 94% chance of making the playoffs.
So I wanted to talk about Paul George because he had a really nice game against Atlanta. They ended up losing. And of course, he's been in and out of the lineup and not playing back-to-backs. And, he and Embiid are both doing that. And so I haven't been as focused on the Sixers, in part because they weren't in the cup and in part because it seems like they never have their team. And I watched a lot of them early, but then PG and Embiid have started working back in. Embiid also had one really huge game. I think it was 39 points, and he was facing up, actually getting to the basket, going to that hang dribble, pull up, getting to the foul line, ducking in, being physical. It seemed like he really made a point of doing that in that 39-point game where he was just getting a ton of stuff around the basket. And then PG had his breakout, although, maybe he'll fall back in. I don't know. Maybe he'll be recaptured. I'm not sure what happens when the breakout then ends up going the other way. But that 35-point game against the Hawks was pretty interesting, and he looks like he's back to being an elite shooter, at least. Which, remember, he wasn't last year. I think we checked it. It's still seared in my memory that about this time last year, he was shooting 27% on uncontested threes. Oh, this year, that's actually 53% on uncontested threes. So he's been making shots again. And he remember last year, he had those 2 hyperextended knees. He was dealing with a groin issue. I think he never had his legs fully under him, and he was trying to play, but just wasn't effective. And I would say that a lot of what I've seen so far, including the Atlanta game, looked like more of an evolutionary through line from what we saw in his last season in LA when he actually played at an all NBA level, I would say. So he's a good shooter again. And that I think is the most important thing that I can take away from this. And also, if he gets a smaller player on him, he can shoot right over that guy. One of the things that he has in his bag that still, despite all the guy's skill level improvements that not a lot of players have, is a step back to his strong hand. Like, he has that. He can get that off against smaller players. And the one thing that I would say I'm a little critical of with him is it's probably been more isolation than I would have liked. It's still been a little too much PG's turn. Mm-hmm. And there hasn't been as much off-ball screening for him, not as much movement necessarily. He also has been really terrible in transition. He's just not an athlete to get out in transition and finish anymore. Not surprising given his age. But I would like to see more using him, particularly having him come off a screen while Maxey is also working up top. Like, I'd like to see more of those sorts of actions where you're occupying the defense with his gravity, whereas he hasn't gotten as many catch and shoot opportunities. And the ISO game has been kind of interesting, but ultimately still is at 44% on 2-pointers for the season. Again, noting that he's working his way back into things. He's at 40% on threes overall, but 38% on long twos. So, and he's getting to the foul line a little bit more than he was last year when it was just a comically low number. So he definitely is. And then on defense, he's not going to be a one-on-one stopper. That has been the case for, basically since before he went to Oklahoma City, quite frankly. But he still knows where to be on defense. And they're playing him more at the three than I think they thought they would. Don Barlow has been playing with him. He had a really nice game as well in their last one. So that's enabling him to do a little bit more as an off-ball defender. Now they don't really, if he's going to play the three, and then you have some guy who's more of a power forward playing the four, and Embiid's going to play the five. Now, who do you actually have to guard the ball? That becomes a little bit of a question. I guess that's VJ and Grimes and Maxey, but this wasn't built to be a great defensive team anyway. It's actually extremely impressive that they are 11th on defense. So I think you could feel pretty good. Yeah, sure, he's never going to be worth that contract that they gave him. That's obvious. But you can feel pretty good that if he's manages to ramp up and stay healthy, that he can be someone who's going to help them this year for sure.
That's really encouraging. Just briefly on the defensive part, just because I was looking at this earlier in the day. The 4 of the 5 teams that have had the best opponent shooting luck so far this year are in the Eastern Conference. Toronto 2nd, Philly 3rd, Detroit 4th, Miami 5th.
And when you say shooting luck, that's on opponent 3-point percentage?
Opponent 3-point percentage, yeah. So the Dallas is number 1, but then the other teams are all in the East. Dallas is the luckiest.
Well, the Washington Wizards are a scalding 2-3 in their last 5, but 5-22 overall on the season. Negative 13.3 net rating is comfortably above the worst of all time. That just like last season, they are really turning it on. They're still 30th in net rating. However, 27th on offense and DFL 123.9 defensive rating. And they project for 17 wins, which would be last in the East.
I wanted to look at Bub Carrington, somebody who I was very high on in the draft process, and wanted to take a look at him. This is his second year, his age 20 season. For those who are less familiar, listed at 6'4", 190, and he's mostly been coming off the bench for the Wizards, but he has started their last 6 games, including their loss on Sunday to the San Antonio Spurs. And so it's a combination of kind of stats and film with him, somebody that I watched a lot on and then believed in the Pitt film. And there are some things that are really encouraging despite the top line stats being pretty bad. He's averaging 8.5 points, 4.3 assists in 27 minutes per game. And the biggest thing that's encouraging about Carrington is the 3-point splits. So he's making 40% of 5.5 threes per 36, and he's making both his pull-up threes and his catch and shoot. Now we're dealing with 50 pull-ups, 62 catch and shoots. There's a lot of time for that sample to grow. But part of what I liked about Carrington was that he was a pull-up 2-point monster at Pitt, and he didn't really shoot the 3, and I thought that he could extend that. I think that we're getting closer to that because he was 36% on pull-up threes last year. So that's going well. And like the jump shot, it looks more comfortable in the film. Like he's, I thought it was a projectable jump shot. I think that's there. And you're like, okay, guys shooting threes, it's not the highest rate you want. Like, why is he only at 51% true shooting? And it is because he is unbelievably terrible on twos this year. 34% overall. And I saw this number and I looked it up because I was watching the randomized film and I'm like, oh my God, his finishing is terrible. Oh yeah, he's 0th percentile, 9 of 38 on all shots at the rim this year. It is unbelievable. Bub Carrington is 4 of 13 on transition twos, which I then watched all of them because I was just like, how could somebody be 4 of 13 in transition? All of the ones he made, except probably for one, were he beats everybody down the floor and just gets a layup or a dunk.
So let me ask you a question. As you watch these, is it a failure of decision-making or execution that he's missing these shots? Should he just never be taking them to begin with? He's just getting swallowed up. He's got no chance of making them. Or is he actually getting a semi-decent look for most players and just doesn't have the touch to finish it?
Mostly too aggressive on the attempts, but there were a couple where
Yeah.
he should have made it. So like there was a play, we actually talked about it because it was that game, the Wizards Mavs game, and the Mavs, I believe they had a late comeback, and he just tried to like drive on Cooper Flag and bumps him, and then Cooper Flag just swats him. There was another play in that same game where PG did the same thing on PJ Washington. PJ Washington just annihilated him. And but there was another one where Bub Carrington tries to drive on Duncan Robinson. Duncan Robinson bumps him off his path. Carrington takes the floater anyway and misses it badly.
Are you implying that Duncan Robinson is not that good of a defender? That like these people shouldn't be getting the ball stolen by him, or should be able to score on him? Is that what you're saying there?
I'm not implying it. I'm stating it outright. But it's that's a concern. And I mean, Carrington, he's pretty slight, and he'll get stronger. But him being a bad finisher, some of that I think is going to be real, and he's going to have to like his Bub Carrington's end-to-end speed is pretty good. It's not wow, but it's pretty good, and so he can harness that. Like the four that he got, it's just he beats everyone down the floor. He runs pretty hard, but if there's someone there, it's at least as of right now, it's not going in.
Yeah, I've always kind of wondered like why is he out there? And Brian Keefe has praised his defense, and maybe that's just because they don't have anyone else who's going to defend at the point of attack really the last couple of years, other than the brief Marcus Smart cameo a season ago. And yeah, like he seems to make shots. He doesn't generate that many of them. They don't really seem to give him the ball very much, but certainly when you can't have any kind of a threat inside the arc, it becomes difficult for something like that. But I still think as you watch this, are you like out on him at this point as someone who is high on him? Or because finishing is something that generally gets at least a little better for most young guards. Is there still a player in here somewhere potentially?
Yes, I think that there is, but I'm less confident than I was that it's going to be there. So the jump shot improving, I think that that's real, and I think there'll be something there. But Carrington needs to be, so he's a good passer, but not a great passer. Like you don't really see his best vision stuff is in transition, which is everyone's best passing vision. It's intriguing because
except Kevin Durant.
Except Kevin.
He's the one guy who throws the terrible passes in transition.
And so, but there are like, for example, like there are some nice Carrington pull-up threes in transition. And so Bub can hit that shot. He can get the pull-up jumper. Then he can be in a rotation. He can do everything else. But part of why I was higher on him in a class that I wasn't super impressed with, and I've warmed to some guys in this class relative to where I was before, is that I thought there was a chance that he could be that on-ball guy. And even if it's a 20% chance that he can be that as a starter, that's so valuable that it's worth it. And Carrington has size. He doesn't have strength yet. That could come in time. And so I'm not out on him overall. I think that there is a way to get here. But the other thing that's concerning is, like, you brought up the kind of like where he fits in with the Wizards offense. So he has, he's 16% usage. And yes, there are bigger mouths to feed with the Washington Wizards. They still have CJ McCollum. They still have Chris Middleton, but they are firmly in a player development arc here. They have that as a coach. They're an incredibly bad team, and they've given Keyshawn George the keys, and he's delivered pretty well with it. So it feels like if Carrington was doing something in practice or in games to take the reins, they would give them to him. And I think that will also happen late in the season because they're just going to, they don't have to trade any of their guys to tank. They're doing plenty fine on their own. But I think they might, do a buyout or something with CJ or Chris Middleton or something like that. And also, but then you also, he's there, but Trey Johnson's back now. He missed 3-4 weeks with this hip injury. And so maybe they're more excited about giving him the keys, and they've given Trey a lot of opportunities on the second unit. So I'm not going to write off Carrington. And I think that point guards often take a long time, but the chance of him reaching like that 10, 20% outcome that I was really excited about as a possibility, that's fading at least a little bit with me.
Let's get to the Indiana Pacers.
They had this stretch where they were looking more convincing, closer to whole. Now they're 6-22, 1-4 since the last 15-60. They got waxed in New Orleans by the Pels on, I think that was Saturday. -9 net rating is 28th, 29th on offense, 24th on defense. And they're now projected to be the second worst team in the East, 24 wins. And they are not making the playoffs. Good thing they have their own pick.
Yes. Yes, as they famously got it back from New Orleans, by the way. Andrew Nembhard, I had wanted for a long time since some of his brief star turns as a lead dog, that crazy game where Golden State just couldn't do anything with him as a rookie. And then, of course, he had a really nice run once Tyrese Haliburton went down against the Celtics. But Rick Carlisle did not deploy him in that role last year. He mostly deployed him in double point guard alignments, mostly playing with Haliburton or potentially TJ McConnell TJ McConnell. And he was not really effective in the run that they gave him as the sole point guard a year ago. But now they basically had no choice but to elevate him. McConnell was out to start the season and also just can't play that many minutes. He's really a backup. So a season ago, he had time of possession of 21%. This year, it is 41.9% of the time that the Pacers have the ball. Our estimate is that he possesses it. His passing creation is at 18%. That was 13% a year ago. So passing creation, what percentage of your team's possessions do you throw a pass that leads to a shot or free throws? Last season, he was at 13.9% scoring creation. Now 21.9%. So total creation is 42.9%. That is a higher number, maybe even than your average point guard. Last year was at 29.8%. And he basically has been just about as efficient as he was a season ago. He's shooting 37% on threes and taking a few more of those. He's been a little bit more aggressive. He's always had that step back to his left. Of course, he hit that super deep one back in the 24 playoffs in game 3 against the Knicks as one of the signatures. He really gets his legs into his shot, so he's comfortable with that one. But he's only at 47% on twos. And as you look at these numbers, Danny, in terms of the play type data, anything jump out to you that's interesting?
Nembhard's been, when you consider especially the surrounding talent, he's been effective as a pick and roll scorer. I mean, he's a little bit under a point per play, but like that's not bad. Like for especially when you consider the team. He's been, a pretty effective transition player, and like, I mean, the spot ups, like that can be a combination of shooting and drives and all that type of stuff. So like he has the shot mix of a guy who's doing hard stuff, but some of the things that are important for that type of player, he's actually doing pretty well.
So the thing that stuck out to me is that his pick and roll numbers are pretty good and his isolation numbers are pretty bad. And that Pelicans game, which I watched the first half of on the plane before the Wi-Fi degraded, was kind of a switching game. And the Pels were doing a lot of switching. And Nembhard was not particularly effective in that game. And so that's kind of what made me look at this as well. So I took a look at some of the isolation film. And as you would expect, he just is not really shifty enough to get by guys. Every once in a while, it'll happen. He had one play where he faked that step back from the 3-point line going left, and then basically did that move where you kind of almost carry it with his left hand and got to the basket and was able to shoot a floater. But he also just doesn't really have explosion to beat the defender to the basket. If he does get in there, it's going to be more of a power move, a slow step move. He likes the same one that Denny Avdia likes, where he just stops completely on one foot to let the defense fly by in the lane. But it's just tough for him to get there in a one-on-one matchup. And he has pretty good ball handling. One of the moves he really likes is left to right between the legs and then pick the ball up and step to his left a little bit to try to get some separation. But largely, it's going to be pretty contested for him when he's attacking off the dribble. And it's mostly going to be a long two in that circumstance, particularly because once the switches happen, it'll be maybe a late switch or it'll happen closer to inside the arc. And so I think that's been pretty effective in shutting them down. And Siakam even as well is not a great one-on-one scorer, where they've been so great in the past against switching defenses was that they would just move the ball so quickly. Haliburton would get off it, find a little crease in the defense, find a guy with a slight advantage. They'd move it so quickly. They had moments when they were attacking in transition in that Pels game, but you didn't see that level of attack. And also when they have a center on the floor, Obi Toppin is still out, then Siakam doesn't have as much room to work either, when he could kind of be the guy operating the most close to the basket. But then they also had Turner who could roll or pop. They just had so much more variety to their offense with Haliburton. Not a huge surprise. So I think Nembhard is effective in pick and roll. He still is getting some primary assignments. He was the main matchup on Jalen Brunson on Thursday. And it's asking a lot of him to be both the point guard with 41% time of possession and also to have that primary matchup. They were doing more switching against the Pels, so it wasn't necessarily the same type of game for them. So I think he is a starting level of point guard. He also can play the two. The big thing is that he can pressure guys up and can guard a lot of smaller threats, or can be physical even with larger guys as well. So he's a valuable player. You're not asking him to come in and be your number one offensive option. He's been overwhelmed in that area so far, but he does know the pick and roll game, and he can make good passes out of that and can score there. If you go to more of a coverage, if you have a more athletic team where you can switch, even the Pels were able to switch against him and it worked pretty well. He's a little easier to shut down, but that's been kind of the case for this whole offense.
If you don't have anything more on Nembhard, we can get to the Atlanta Hawks.
Yeah, Trae Young is back, and maybe that's why they've been giving up 80-point halves. I can't say I have not had a chance to watch any of them since Trae came back. However, the Atlanta Hawks are 15-15. They, like the Heat, are in a little bit of a free fall of late, 1-4. Since we last checked in on, their negative 1.5 net rating is 18th in the league. They're 14th on offense, 18th on defense. I would say the latter is disappointing given the personnel that they've had available. Obviously, Porzingis has been out, but Trae Young has been out too. So BPI says they're going to be the 8th seed, 42 wins, and 65% chance of making the playoffs. So now that Trae has returned, let's take a little bit of stock of what took place while he was out offensively.
Just briefly before we do that,
yeah,
considering how the season started, the Hawks being 500 and having the projection of 42-40 is just so on brand, even though the season hasn't been that so far. It's just cracked me up. Yeah, I wanted to look because with Trae Young coming back, it's sort of a version of the doing a post-mortem on a player after they're injured is, well, what did it look like for the Hawks offensively with Trae Young off the floor and Jalen Johnson on? And it's been a surprising success. 117.3 offensive rating in already over 1,600 possessions, and they have a positive net rating in those minutes. And so I wanted to look at like what worked in those groups, what didn't. And there were a couple things that stood out. So one of them was that their shot mix was very healthy. In those lineups, 36% of Hawks attempts are inside 4 feet, and only 5.3% is long twos. So they're taking some of the juiciest shots a lot and taking some of the other ones aren't. And the only thing that's weak in their shot mix is that their 3-point attempt rate is low, but like who is going to take those shots? They took a fair amount of corner threes. They didn't take arc threes, but who the hell was going to take them? Like that was, those players were largely, unavailable. That's Trae Young on this team. And I brought up how the shot mix was healthy. They also made their shots around the basket. So they're taking more than most teams, making about 2.5% more than the league average there. So that's something that's really good. But then the other thing that at first was more of a surprising strength is that without Trae, in these minutes, the Hawks shot 38.5% from three. League average is 36.2. So they were better than league average from three without Trae Young on the floor with Jalen Johnson, who is not a 3-point shooter. And 42% from the corners, 37% on arc threes. And so that got me into like, well, who's hitting shots for the Hawks? And it's In some ways, it's actually sort of a similar story. A few weeks ago, I talked about this with the Houston Rockets. I think it was actually about a month ago because time flies. And it's a sort of similar story in that there are guys who take shots are making them. So Nickeil Alexander-Walker's at 39% this year. Okongwu's making
Vic
36.
Krejci, long live Vic Krejci with 8.5 3-point attempts per 36 and 47% on threes.
I think he made a bunch of them in that game against the Bulls today too. Yeah, he was 6 of 10 from 3, which wasn't even included. I pulled the stats before their game today. It notably, potentially, Risache is not. He's at 31% on 6.4 per 36. And so their guys, most of their guys, Risache accepted, who are taking them are making them. Trae missed it, but he only played 5 games, so we're not counting him out there. And so the guys who are taking them are making them. The guys who can't make them aren't taking them. Also, weirdly, Jalen Johnson's at 39%, but he's not taking that many. And then Dyson Daniels isn't taking them at all anymore. We've talked about that previously. So that was something that so it's interesting. So they're the guy, and those are overall stats, not just for the Jalen Johnson on minutes. That's too hard to pull in terms of a useful stat because you're parsing. A couple other Hawks things that I wanted to look into. So one of them is, well, what is Jalen Johnson's role like? How is it similar? How is it different with Trae Young off and on the floor, albeit in a small sample this year because Trae's only played 5 games? Jalen Johnson's usage rate goes up by 3%, but his assist rate goes way up. So Jalen Johnson is way more of a scorer and way less of a distributor when Trae Young is on the floor. That kind of makes sense, in terms of what the distribution. And he also, one of the things that I found fascinating is that Jalen Johnson's free throw attempt rate is actually stronger in the small sample size with Trae Young on the floor. So even though he has the ball in his hands more, he gets to the line less. He passes it more, all that type of stuff. And, you get into, it's a small enough sample. It could be a number of different things, but I found that pretty interesting. And then I've been focusing on these Jalen on, Trae off minutes. And the overall net rating is a 3.3. But the most used lineups were much better than that. So the core most used lineups are Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Dyson Daniels, Zachary Risache, Jalen Johnson, and then either Onyeka Okongwu or Kristaps Porzingis. With Okongwu plus 6.2 net rating in about 400 possessions. With Porzingis plus 9.9 net rating in 275. So those are real samples. They're not insanely large, but they're real samples. It was the kind of the more mixed lineups when you get into some of the like more backup heavy groups where Jalen Johnson was on. You're going to get some of those just didn't really work out. There was one interesting split where they turned it over on 22% of their possessions. And so I thought that was fascinating too, because so it's this idea that I've been kind of noodling around, which is, what would the Hawks be like without Trae Young? And that's really what led to me doing this work was, could they make it work? And I'm still not sure. And it depends on, as we often do, like, how are you defining success? But the defense, I think the defense can work, even if it hasn't been as successful overall this year as I would have hoped and expected. But there is a pathway to me to being a respectable team. And I don't think it's to being a great team. I think that 9.9 net rating of that best lineup, that overstates things a bit. But I found that pretty striking overall, that they it's not a perfect team, but especially with some of the work that Nickeil Alexander-Walker has been doing, I think they could survive it. And so now I think, maybe we'll see how Trae Young the rest of the season works out. Maybe he opts in, but the idea that they could potentially weather an extended absence, much less like a permanent absence, it's more possible for me now than it was before Trae Young got hurt. I thought it was going to kill him.
Yeah. Now, the other aspect of that, though, is that they have to get into the top 10 on defense without him. And that has not been the case so far. The two things that have been killing them defensively are that they are 28th in location effective field goal percentage and giving up just a ton of shots at their 28th in allowing shots at the rim. And then their defensive rebounding is 25th. And that's not really good enough either, which Jalen Johnson puts up some pretty big defensive rebounding stats at times. But this is a big group. Like Okongwu, yeah, he's not a great defensive rebounder. He's gotten a little better in that area, but still is not his forte. But they have enough overall size that they just should be better in that area and should be able to get more, because they're not really playing. I mean, unless they're going to go to Keaton Wallace, they're not playing anybody. I guess Luke Kennard would be the other one, who's just sort of like a small, unathletic guard, at least during this period. So that's where I think they've been disappointing.
Well, and Nate, they were 11th. They were 11th last year in defensive rebounding. Like that was maybe the anomaly, but they could be better.
Well, they had Clint Capella last year.
That's true. They did.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, that's as much as Porzingis was a shiny object, and I was very much on board on that acquisition, and they easily could have afforded to bring Capella back, and he would have given them more than Porzingis this year. Now, again, with no Trae Young, then it would have been pretty ugly in terms of the spacing and all that on the offensive end. And Okongwu has really helped them there. I thought their rotation today was kind of interesting as well. So they're bringing Alexander Walker off the bench again. He played 29 minutes in this one, and he did, in fact, get the close. So your closing group was Young, Alexander Walker, Okongwu, Johnson, and Dyson Daniels. So not a ton of shooting there. Daniels and Johnson together can be tough. And then Quinn Snyder actually went offense defense with Krejci and Daniels down the stretch. So that was noteworthy. Ricochet got the start, did not get the close. He played 24 minutes. And really, they should just be starting Alexander Walker. He's better than Ricochet, but there's still number one overall pick has to start. You mentioned Ricochet has kind of been unimpressive so far this year. Still think he has some potential, but also that's not looking like the right pick at number one, as Reed Shepherd is just tossing in threes against the Denver Nuggets lately. So
one other stat.
Anything else there?
Yes, one other stat before we move on from the Hawks. 406 clean the glass possessions with no Porzingis or Okongwu on the floor. And they've been fine overall and on offense. Plus 2.3 net rating, 118.2 offensive rating. I thought that would be a much bigger problem. They're shooting the three well, 38% in those minutes. And since Mohamed Gay has been their primary center, those configurations actually offensive rebound. 31.4% offensive rebound rate is actually pretty good. And so I wasn't expecting that. Like I thought, they have all the spacing, it's gonna be so good. But to put up a 118 offensive rating with Trae Young missing almost the entire season and not having spacing at the 5, it's impressive.
Yeah, the backup center now is Mo Gay, but Okongwu still played 39 and a half minutes, which is just a ton for a center. I mentioned that the Hawks are last in location, 28th in location effective field goal percentage. The Chicago Bulls put up 152 points and did not take a single shot from mid-range. They only had to take 8 shots in the upper paint, of which they made 5. They took 42 shots at the rim. That's on the heels of the Bulls actually taking 54 shots at the rim against the Hornets last week. And then, of course, Chicago took the rest of their shots from 3 and shot 20 of 42. So, yeah, that's how you get to $152. I mean, our luck-adjusted scoring, which is still in beta, we got to update it for all the rookies. But it didn't think that either of these teams was actually, like, that far off from getting 150 points.
Well, there were basically no turnovers in the game. And,
yeah, exactly, right? There's some offensive rebounding. Both teams were over 30% offensive rebounding. They didn't turn it over at all, and they both killed each other at the rim. So there's not a lot of luck involved when you get to that, even with the three-point shooting.
Nate, the funny thing is, I bet the biggest part of that luck adjustment is that both teams missed a bunch of free throws. Like the Bulls missed 13 free throws in a game when they posted a 140 offensive rating.
Yeah. Wow. All right, let's see. Where do I want to go next here? Let's go to Detroit.
The Pistons are 22-6, 3-1 since the last time we talked about them. They're third in net rating, plus 8.4, ninth on offense, second on defense, projected as the 2 seed with 55 wins. They are going to make the playoffs. They're currently the top seed in the East.
Yeah, and plus 8.4 net rating. That's starting to make that 22-6 record seem kind of real. And because early on they were doing it a lot in clutch games. Now they're actually starting to win games that they should win. They did have a loss to Dallas in which Jay Bickerstaff wasn't too happy. I want to talk about the offense of Ausar Thompson, who is a pretty interesting player, of course, and makes a lot of plays defensively. Definitely is one of the best on the perimeter there. So we know he basically is just not shooting it at all anymore. He actually took 25% of his shots as a rookie from 3 and shot 18%. So he's pretty much phasing that out. Every once in a while, he'll take a corner 3, but it's pretty much he's just not going to shoot it from there. And so if that's not the case, what was exciting for him last year was that he started doing more with the ball, making some passes and also attacking in transition. And he was a big part of why they had this revolution in transition offensively. This year, I've been a little underwhelmed. You want to give some of the top line numbers on him before I get into what I looked at film wise?
Overall, Ausar Thompson, 11.5 points per game, 5.7 rebounds, but 54% true shooting. As you said, he's not taking any threes anymore, and he's dropped from 57% on twos last year to 54% this year.
Yeah, and for that player type, you really need to be close to 60%. And of course, he's not a fully formed player by any means, but I when I said he's not taking threes, he's really not taking. He's 4 of 17 for the season on spot up jumpers. And so what I really would like to see from him, given his athleticism and his power, is can he be one of those guys that, hey, you know what? He's just so good attacking off the dribble that it doesn't matter, right? Like he doesn't really need a 3-pointer. You can give him the ball, maybe not as the primary pick and roll threat, but he certainly played on the ball at overtime elite. But he should be able to attack in a straight line. So I wanted to actually look at what he was doing in isolation, where he has not really been effective. And I wanted to take a look at why that was, because he's not being guarded by great defenders most of the time. You'll see teams try to hide some of their guards, or maybe, a non-shooting big or something along those lines. I think most teams now are not putting their center on him because Jalen Brunson is just too big and massive, and he's also really good attacking off the dribble and could overwhelm smaller players or just kill you on the offensive glass or just jump right over you for a dunk if you're trying to do some switching with him. So Thompson hasn't been guarded as much by centers this season in the games that I've seen. So he's been there's a lot of these attacks that I was watching where with guys you would think he would just be able to overwhelm. Especially he has the physical profile of the sort of player who can do that, where with the way that you can Euro step, that you can knock guys backwards, use your physicality, but he never has really been that intuitive of a finisher. Even going back to the overtime elite film, that's one of the reasons that I liked Amen a little bit more. Amen also just had a better handle. I was a little bit better of a finisher and was a better passer. Ausar was a pretty good passer too, but Ausar was supposedly going to be the better shooter. I thought they were both going to just suck at shooting. So I'm like, I'm going to go with the guy who's better at everything else and Amen on my board. And yeah, Ausar just doesn't really play very physically, and he's not that aggressive. He also is down to 54% from the free throw line, which is not great either. And a lot of times he's stopping, he's having to spin back. He'll get kind of stuck near the dotted line and then end up pivoting, and nobody's really open and the clock's running down. So he has to take a bad fadeaway, which is just a no hope shot for him. And not no hope literally, but just one where you're just like, oh, this is what we're getting. Like it should be a last resort, and it's not. And he'll get in this circumstance where he hasn't really beaten the guy, tries to spin, doesn't beat him with the spin, and then he's caught, and there's really nothing open. And I was talking about this with Dubin, like how damaging it is when you try to attack and you don't actually get anywhere, and then you just get stuck and the clock's running down, and even finding an outlet for a pass, not to mention a pass that's actually incisive, it becomes difficult. Has a lot of turnovers in these circumstances as well, because he's just not drawing the second defender. And so if he's trying to make a pass, there's no reason for the guy he's passing to not be guarded.
Yeah,
at that point.
It's sort of like the new trend in sideline out of bounds to not guard the inbounder. It's actually really hard to make a pass when no one's paying attention to you.
Yeah. So I didn't see that many circumstances of him getting separation. Now he's really fast in transition and he can get some alley-oops. Like he's a great leaper. But what I want to see is when he has the ball and guys are laying off him, get ahead of steam up and go right at him. And he doesn't seem to really quite have the ability to do that for whatever reason. I mean, he's a great athlete, but he's just not really physical. Doesn't really understand how to ward off the defense using his shoulders or get extension if there's a bigger guy on him, or to just use that footwork and power to knock defenders who are athletically inferior to him out of the way or go around them and score. So that's kind of disappointing to me. Now, there's one play where he's going downhill on a pick and roll. Some of his best film is a pick and roll set inside the arc with Duren. And Duren has enough gravity that the big doesn't necessarily want to leave him. And so then he could really get going downhill. He had a beautiful Euro step at that point. But there's just, it doesn't seem, it's like when he attacks, it's almost like, well, I guess I'm supposed to do this, so I will. There's not just this hunger and aggression to get on top of the rim that you see from maybe his brother, his brother hasn't been that great with that this year. But, someone along the lines of like a Russell Westbrook or someone like that who has somewhat similar physical skills, but just it's like, all right, I'm relentless. I'm getting the basket. You're not going to stop me. He just doesn't have that.
Ausar Thompson is converting 54% of his contested finishes. That is kind of right around league average. It's a little bit below just because they happen to be near each other on the sheet. LaMelo Ball is at 54.4, not where Amen is. Amen's at 59.3. And that's a huge difference when you think about it. Makes more of a difference for Ausar Thompson because he's taking fewer of everything else. So if he's not making his contested shots around the basket, well, then what else is he doing offensively?
All right, who's next for you?
Let's go to the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah, they continue to struggle. 11-18, 1-3 in their last 4. They have a negative 3.7 net rating, 21st in the league, down to 19th on offense now. 22nd on defense, and they project still for the 10 seed, 35-47. I'm not sure what BPI is doing as far as projecting Giannis to return. He was seen doing some stuff after shoot around today, but it still feels like New Year, maybe slightly after he got hurt on December 3rd is probably what we're looking at. And BPI says 8% chance of making the playoffs. I would give him higher than that, especially if you get Giannis into a play-in situation. He might not be on the team anymore. John and I both said around 35% chance we think that he gets traded by the deadline. They did make the splashy move to get Myles Turner in. How's that going so far?
It's a mixed bag. And Myles Turner, so I'll phrase this in the starting in a positive way, and then you'll get why I did this. So Myles Turner is making 38% of 7.4 threes per 36. That's impressive for a center, for a true 7-foot-ish guy who has been in a lot in his career one of like an underappreciated shot blocker. Despite that, Myles Turner has 58% true shooting, which is below the positional average of center. You're like, damn, how can a guy be shooting that many threes and not be there? It's because, to use one of your phrases, Myles Turner has become a caricature of himself offensively. That 7.4 threes per 36 minutes, that's a career high. It's almost a full three-pointer per 36 minutes, higher than his career high and 2 above the number 2 season he ever had. But Myles Turner is only taking 4.5 twos per 36 minutes. So he's basically taking not quite 2, but 1.5 times as many threes as he is twos. And as you would expect, that means that you're not getting to the line very much. But Myles Turner hasn't been a high free throw attempt guy early in his career. It's just that he's not getting those twos and he's not making them either. Myles Turner is down to 52% on twos. And like I compiled these stats before their close loss in Minnesota, where Myles Turner attempted 8 3-pointers and made 3 of them, and 3 2-pointers and made 1 of them. So that's only going to exacerbate these numbers overall. And so,
yeah. And can I elaborate on that too? he's got 10 dunks in 28 games after having 59 in 72 games last year. And now I think every single one of those has actually just been like a monster detonation because it always involves him pump faking at the arc, putting it on the floor for a couple, and then there's plenty of time for someone to come over, but he's so long he could just take off from the dotted line and just completely annihilate people every now and then. But so I don't think he is 29, but I don't think it's an issue of like, oh, he can't jump anymore or something along those lines. It's really more just who's feeding him, how he's being used, as you're going to get to, I think.
Yeah, and so you brought up the numbers, but it went from dunks were 9% of all his shot attempts last year to under 4% this year. So that's a huge shift in those, you're going to make a large portion of your dunks. And so it's not that like going to Myles Turner inside the arc, it's not that he's taking those rim attempts and settling for floaters or mid-rangers. He's just not getting them at all. And that's why his usage rate has dropped from 21% to 18%. But the setting up is a really important part of the story. So this is, I like to look at, I pull up this year's stats and last year's stats for especially when a player has a change in situation. Last year, full season, Myles Turner was the roll man, meaning that he received the ball, or I think technically if he was called for a foul, it might count there too, on 154 plays last season. Going into Sunday's game, he was the roll man, so rolling rather than a pick and pop. Yeah. That 154 is 13 this year.
Yeah.
And some of that is not having Tyrese Halliburton anymore. Some of that is playing with Giannis Antetokounmpo. But that is just a remarkable shift. And so it's part of it is that they're just not running as many screening actions involving Myles Turner. But another part is that, last year, 44% of the time when he screened, he popped. This year, that's 65%. So when he's screening, it's going to be a three, and like they're going in at a reasonable rate. But when you think about the ways that a player can be efficient, the ways that in an ideal world that they can drive efficient offense, it's just such a different diet for Myles Turner this year than it was last year.
Well, and that's even to the extent that he's involved in the play as well. With Giannis, it's usually they're more comfortable screening for him with someone like AJ Green, getting a smaller player involved. Giannis doesn't want a bigger player closer to him. That's the whole point of Myles Turner, is he's going to space that guy out to some degree. And so I do talk about this when we're thinking about trading Giannis, and now maybe they should be using Myles more as a role man now that Giannis is out, but then, they don't really have any other great pick and roll point guards that are going to get him the ball rolling to the basket anyhow. So, but Giannis, if you're going to trade him, he's kind of a tough fit. Like, you see what the difference, even Turner, a guy who's a stretch five, part of the value you get from him is that he also can roll to the basket, or he can get quick duck-ins, and everyone on Indiana can do that. And certainly they had a unique offensive system, and Halliburton was a big driver of that. They're not looking the same this year without Turner, and of course much more so without Halliburton anyway. But you think about having to fit with Giannis Antetokounmpo, particularly if there's another ball dominant star on the team already, it can be perhaps kind of difficult. Anything else you want to say on Turner?
Couple things. So you wanted me, you mentioned the idea, because we have these notes and we're throwing ideas back and forth about, well, what is Myles Turner's role with and without Giannis? And there is a real difference here. So when Giannis is on the floor, Myles Turner has 16% usage. When Giannis is off the floor, that goes to 20.5. And he's less efficient, but he's more involved in the offense. And he's taking more twos relative to his threes, but he's taking more shots overall, higher usage rate. So that's something that's interesting. So it is like, there is a fair argument that Giannis being on the floor marginalizes Turner, but Turner being spacing, because you also have to think about, well, what is the alternative? And so if you're not playing, if you're not playing Myles Turner out there, then it's going to probably be somebody who's a worse shooter, and it's probably going to be somebody who's a worse defender. That's the raison d'etre in a certain way. It's not necessarily to be the guy, it's to occupy the guy. And then the other thing, I was mostly focused on this massive offensive disparity, was just I did a little bit of the looking on like, well, how's Myles Turner's rim protection been? And it's It's not as good as it was. So both Myles Turner's block percentage and his block rate, so like blocks per 36, those are both down. It would be the lowest blocks per 36 of Myles Turner's career. He is contesting the fourth highest number of shots per game, but opponents are actually making them so far this year. Small sample, we'll see what it is over the fall season. So last year, opponents made 57.7% of the shots that Myles Turner contested. This year, that's 64%. That is a higher free field goal percentage allowed than Derek Queen. I just happened to see him. They're contesting relatively similar rates, but Derek Queen, 63% allowed. Myles Turner, 64. So sometimes a guy does just lose it. I'm willing to, considering Myles Turner's track record, think that this is a regression to the mean coming. I also hope that because I really like Myles Turner as a player. But you always want to flag it because we'll check it later in the year.
Two more teams left, I believe, Charlotte and Boston. Let's go to Charlotte.
The Hornets are 9-19 on the season. They have split their last 4 games, 2-2. Negative 4.2 net rating is 23rd, 21st on offense, and 21st on defense. Still not going to make the playoffs. 29 wins is their BPI projection, which would be the 12 seed out east.
So Brandon Miller has been back. The Hornets are actually playing pretty well when he is in the lineup. 6-4 when that is the case. Now, they do have a negative 5.8 net rating when Brandon Miller is on the floor. So it's not that he's necessarily driving that to some insane degree. Individual numbers for him so far, Danny, definitely a little concerning, we could say, although it's early on in his season, but it hasn't looked good so far.
I think that would be fair to say. On the season, 50% true shooting on 30 usage. That is an incredibly high usage rate. A big part of that is that he's shooting 32% from 3. We hope for more of that. And Brandon Miller's taking 10 per 36. That's less than LaMelo, but not less than that many other players. But it's the 2-pointer. Brandon Miller so far, small sample, has played 350 minutes this year. 42% on 2s this year. It was 50% roughly his rookie year. 47.5, now 42.2 in a small sample.
And I thought that his finishing would be a big problem. That's not the case. He's basically slightly above the league median, 55% on contested 2s inside of 10 feet, which is the number we got. I wish that were inside of 5 feet, but that's the number that we're able to procure. But on plays that Sport Radar says are runners, he's 2 out of 10, and then he's 28% on jumpers off the dribble, which is a lot of his 2s. And so that's how you get to shooting 42% on 2s. And that clearly, given that very high usage, is probably too much at this point in time. And particularly because where I had a lot of hope for him was that he'd be used more off ball. He's only had 8 plays that were logged as off screen by Sport Radar. So I was hopeful that he could get to a few more of those. He's got 8.8 drives per game per the Sport Radar tracking. Not really any more than last year when he wasn't shooting quite as much. He likes to go left as a lot of guys, right-handed guys do a little bit more. And then as a passer, like he's okay. 9.4% passing creation is kind of a lower level number 2 type of number for him, 9.4% there. And the one thing that you would say has looked better this year is he's taking 4.6 free throw attempts per 36. So that is a nice evolution, potentially. He's clearly been passed by Concanippel in their hierarchy. I think that's, at least as an offensive player, that seems pretty clear. And at this point, with the way Miller has played, especially with some of the injury issues, and we'll note too that he's coming back from this shoulder subluxation that it seems like they were at least maybe contemplating possibly getting surgery on. And he even had kind of a retweak with that, missed a couple of games. So the question I want to ask you, though, is it's kind of looking like Miller is not on an all-star path anytime soon. If he is not going to become that level of scorer and shooter, what is he when it comes to extension negotiations next year? Let's say I think he'll get better as a 2-point shooter this year. I sure hope he does, or he needs to shoot less. 42% is atrocious. But let's say he just kind of continues being essentially what he's been with maybe some small improvements, not a real breakout, which you would have hoped for in year 3. How are you approaching that as Jeff Peterson?
It's thorny because forwards are still immensely valuable, but forwards who aren't like I don't think you disagree that he's, you don't want him defending the other team's best wing guy. So that
Yeah.
means, generally speaking, what that player needs to do, they need to be able to hit open shots. And I believe Brandon Miller can do that. Like, I think that there's an improvement coming from his 3-point shot. You brought up the twos as well. But it's I'm not saying they're the same type of player, though there are more elements, commonalities between them that I would have thought early on. Is the idea of like, so I brought up before, like, I've always been uncomfortable with Brandon Ingram because it's the idea of like, where does he fit in on a really good team? Now, Miller is a better shooter than Ingram, but he's been a way worse converter of shots. Like, the shots that Ingram has been made his diet, he's better at those shots than Brandon Miller is. And so for Charlotte, if you're committing a year early, he has a huge cap hold, and that might actually matter for the Hornets because they have like no money other than LaMelo committed for the 27-28 season.
Yeah.
So of course, if you could get him on third forward money, you do it, but that's not going to happen. Like, he's not going to commit to that. And so, like, I mean, it's a hard branch of extension because it's like, okay, if he's he's probably your 4th or 5th best starter. He's probably your second or probably your 3rd best offensive player. That's just not a type of guy that you see extended or really hit free agency that often. It's just a weird fit. I brought up Ingram before. I mean, I think that he'd probably, Ingram he signed that extension that was, I think it was about $40 million a year. It was shorter term, or signed that deal. It was $40 million a year, but it was 2+1.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised now whether you rate that for inflation because it starts a couple of years later than Ingram. I think that Miller's probably going to be looking for something in that range. But if that's what he's demanding, I wouldn't give that to him.
Surely it can't.
I'd say earn it. If it's 30, if he's asking for 30 with where the cap is probably going to be at that point, I think you listen, because I think if he outperforms it, especially in a year that there might be teams with cap space, but I'd say if it's more than 30, 32, I wouldn't feel comfortable with it.
So probably the comp would be Trey Murphy at this point, but Murphy, I don't remember exactly where he was as a shooter statistically, but he had shown that he was going to make shots in a way that I don't think that Brandon Miller has at this point in time. And he also was a better finisher around the basket. Murphy's gotten a little bit better as a dribbler and passer than he's been in the past. Miller certainly has more of those skills, but you also wonder, like, do you really want to use them when he's at his present level of efficiency inside the arc? But Miller's better as a passer, better at getting to spots. In terms of defense, I'd say they're relatively even. Murphy's maybe a little bit better of a playmaker. Miller maybe a little bit better on ball or getting over screens, but neither of them are great at any of those. But so let's say, I would think then, though, I would conclude that he has accomplished less than Trey Murphy. He's actually not that much younger than Trey because he came out later compared to where Trey was when he got extended. But I think, so you might say a little bit less than what Trey Murphy got, unless he starts making shots like Trey Murphy did, which could happen. I think like one of the best parts of his game has been the 3 ball. If you had to say what's going to improve the most, it would probably be that. But yeah, so it's going to be an interesting situation. We'll be watching him very closely, I think, but especially because this 30 usage is crazy right now, and like that he would do himself a favor, I think, to tone that down. It's not like I think 7 of the games that he's played in, LaMelo has been there, and Knipple plays every game pretty much. So it's not like they've just had nobody and he's had to take all the shots. I mean, maybe some of the bench units, Trey Mann has been out recently, but they still have Colin Sexton on that team too. Like, he should not be shooting this much,
especially not without the success, which hasn't been there so far. And when you take that many shots a higher proportion of them are going to be tough, a smaller proportion are going to be easy, and that hasn't helped him. But he wouldn't be doing great even if you took out the worst 10% of his shots. He's just missing more than he should.
All right, let's talk about the Boston Celtics.
The Celtics are 17-11, 2-2 since last 15-60, but they are 6th in net rating, plus 5.8, 4th on offense, 16th on defense, projected to be the 4 seed in the Eastern Conference. Yes, you heard that right. 49 wins, 4 seed in the East. BPI gives them a 98% chance of making the playoffs, and a big part of that is Jaylen Brown stepping up.
Jaylen Brown was one of the most intriguing players in the league to me, and you wondered whether he and Derek White would kind of be on a gap year. If one of them got hurt, maybe the Celtics would just kind of take it easy this season, and Jaylen Brown's just been way too good for that, and he has taken on the role of a leading man exceedingly well. This season, he has possessed the ball, we estimate, 28.7% of the time that they are on offense. Last year, that was 21.6% of the time. Our passing creation metric, which measures the number of times that a player, when he is on the floor, throws a pass that leads to a shot or a turnover, 12.6% passing creation. Last year was 10.8%. I actually expected there to be more of a difference there. He has not been passing that much more than he was a season ago. Instead, it's just been his scoring, which is way, way up. So his total creation, which is turnovers, scoring attempts, passes that leads to shots, 48.6% of the Celtics shots when he's on the floor, he either creates with a pass, shoots, or I guess it's not a shot, but he turns it over. So that number last year was 39.5%. Remember, they had Drew Holiday last year. They didn't have Anthony Simons, but he hasn't played that big of a role. And of course, they had Jason Tatum as well.
Can I
yes.
mention a little bit about the context of that 48.6 total creation?
Yeah.
Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is at 49.2. James Harden is at 48.2. So he's between Harden and Shai in terms of how much Jaylen Brown is running the Celtics offense.
Yeah, that's crazy. And he's really improved his turnover rate as well. And his pick and roll game is just way better than it was last year. So last year, when he attempted to score out of pick and roll, he turned it over 18% of the time. This year, that's down to 13%, which for an on-ball guy is a pretty decent number. And pick and roll plus isolation is 42% of his offense. That's just pretty much totally self-created. And his shot making has been awesome. That's really been the heart of why he's able to be more effective, because he's forcing the defense to react to his shot making. He's got one of the absolute hardest shot diets in the league. We would project him to shoot 48.9% field goal percentage. So again, you put some of those numbers out there based on his shot diet. That's Jalen Brunson, Devin Booker, right in that 49% range. So it's not quite DeRozan or Ingram level or KD. Like those guys are more 47%, but it's that next tier of shot difficulty. And with his shot making, he's adding 6.0 percentage points of field goal value to that. So last year, he had a much better shot quality. And not much better, but about 51%. But he shot about 51% field goal percentage. So his shot quality has gone down by 2%, but his field goal percentage has gone up by 4%. Also, the shot diet being harder. 70% of his shots last year were self-created. Now 80% of them are. And he didn't shoot well from three last year, 32%. This year, he's at 50% on long twos. Last year, 42%. So 50% on long twos again. That is an elite number. And he's never been this level of shooter before. And certainly not off the dribble. Because that's the other thing in his pick and roll game. 13 of 24 on threes off the dribble in pick and roll. So over 50%. And so as you look at the film, the defense is largely having to react to him. It starts off with, if you're going to play a drop coverage on him, especially Neemias Queta, who's made himself into a nice roll man, well, he's going to just slam that guy with the screen, and Jaylen Brown is going to shoot a three off the dribble, and he's going to make it. Or he can snake the pick and roll, and just about anybody who's on him, he can get off the ground so much that if you get away from his body, he's going to get that mid-ranger off, and it's going to be a 50% shot. So teams have had to react to him quite a bit. And in some of the recent games that I saw, they had the big getting up more to get the ball out of his hands, or at least pretty close to up to touch. And that then is unlocked his passing game. And probably the pass that he's been best at is that quick pass over the top to the roll man. And Kate has actually been effective catching near the free throw line and taking a dribble or two, or a lot of times it'd be a guard screening for him as well. So teams don't want to switch him because he's also been really good in isolation. And so they feel like they actually have to get the ball out of his hands on pick and rolls at the top of the key, which I never thought I would say with Jaylen Brown. And then the other aspect too is if you're in any kind of a drop, or if you're trying to switch and put a smaller player on him, he's gotten pretty good at rejecting the screen. And any time you get a smaller player on him, his handle has gotten so much better now to where he's able to get to spots against smaller players and either rise up or knock him backwards, do that slow steps finish, or make the pass that he needs to make, which again is the thing that's been missing because he's just going slower and he doesn't feel like he's going to lose the ball. A lot of times that's going to speed you up. If you feel like you're going to lose the ball, it's like, well, all right, well, I better go right to the basket right now, put 2 hands in the ball, and it ends up being a wild finish or a turnover. But if you have that confidence, and the Celtics always have very good spacing, Joe Mazzulla really preaches that. They still are shooting a ton of threes. He can probe and keep himself on the ball, make a pass to a shooter, or get to a spot and finish against a smaller player. And then if you play sort of like more of like a catch coverage, maybe up to touch, but not really like a pure blitz to get it out of his hands, then he also can accelerate and blow by that guy and still finish it at the rim. So he's actually become a very effective isolation and even more so pick and roll player. And that's been one of the foundations of the Celtic offense and how he's managed to up his usage while also getting way more efficient this year.
And I think it's a couple of different important parts of the story. So Jaylen Brown had this really rough 24-25 season relative to his standards. That was, and we've talked about this with a lot of marketing too. Like he was battling an injury and pretty clearly a lot of last season. And so part of it was getting healthy, but he's also a materially significantly better player than he was. And to me, the money number, we're not doing awards for another couple weeks, but Jaylen Brown, we brought up that his role within the Celtics offense is between Harden and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. The Boston Celtics have a 122.6 offensive rating when he's on the floor. That is extremely good. And so he has this huge role. The Celtics are doing, and of course, their talent, like even if their talent is worse, the scheme, some of the philosophy stuff he is benefiting from that. And one of the other things that is partially Mazzulla in the scheme, but partially Jaylen Brown, is that they don't turn the ball over as a team. Like Jaylen Brown's individual turnover rate is higher this year, will be a career high, but he has a larger role within the offense. And that is a completely acceptable part of the equation for him. He's been fabulous.
All right, then. Well, that will do it. We made it through all 15. It's been a while since that, but hey, we want to spend some more time this week with our families. So we'll be a little bit lighter of a week. We're going to still do 3 episodes this week, though, including Christmas, and we'll be around on Tuesday. And John and I will also do an episode. And also, of course, we got that NBA strategy stream coming up later tomorrow. That'll be a good one between Golden State and Orlando. Golden State always seems to play some kind of a close game, so I imagine that'll be a good one as well. Thanks so much for watching and listening, and we'll talk to y'all next time.